And Carly, can I check, are we ready to go for 9?
Yes, you are, my end.
Yep, all ready to go.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Tēnā koutou katoa, haere mai ke tēnei hui, ki te mana whenua, rangi tānei, he mihi nui. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Morning everyone and welcome to the Planning and Strategy Committee for April. We obviously are all online today and so I will just quickly shoot through our housekeeping, which we're all very familiar with now. So if you can please make sure to keep your cameras on but microphones muted. We are obviously live streaming to our YouTube channel and we'll just continue to use the hand up function as we have been. And if you have got any amendments or additional recommendations, I'll just remind you to send those through to Carly and Sarah so that they can be put up on the screen. And any staff or other speakers, if you can use your name before, introduce yourself before speaking, so we've captured that on record. Right. So looking at our order of business, first up we've got apologies. We do have an apology from Councillor Beattie for early departure. Are there any other apologies?
Madam Chair, it's the Mayor here. Depending on how long the meeting goes, I may be early departure on council business as well. All depends on how long we go. Thank you.
Okay, let's capture that just in case then. I don't have anyone in the queue, so I will move that the committee receive apologies for Councillor Susan Beattie for early departure and the Mayor early departure on council business, seconded by Councillor Hapeta. Thank you. And I'll just wait for elected members to come back on the screen. Okay, so we will vote with a show of hands. So all in favour? Any opposed? Abstentions? That is carried. We haven't had a notification of any additional items. Are there any declarations of interest? Great. Moving on to item 4. We do have a public comment from Chris Whaipu, and we have had some material to support Chris's public comment pre-circulated, so you should have that in front of you. I see that Chris is online, is that right? Yes, I see Chris in the list of attendees. Oh, there we go. Kia ora, Chris. So you've got 3 minutes to make your comment, and then there may be some questions from elected members afterwards, and I will just hand it over to you. You can start when you're ready.
Thanks, Alicia. Ngā mihi o te ata kia koutou, ngā kaunihiranga māngai o te tau nenei. Since I've only got 3 minutes, I'll jump straight in now. When I started the conversation in 2018, I actually asked for the entire site, but in 2021, I was informed that I would have a better chance of only getting half. So the rationale for moving, I think, has already been explained around our kohanga reo and our rapid growth. But the reason we asked for the entire site is that we've held a long-term aspiration to build a new urban marae. And the site, we feel, would lend itself nicely to this with some basic offices, Marakai, Rongowa Gardens, etc. And we also want to offer community wraparound services for the learning of Te Reo Māori, Kaumātua services, and also provide an after-school program. These are all current gaps needed, but importantly in line with our values of Hiniote, of Manaaki and Aroha ki te tangata. Right now, there's only one option for Hiniote, and this is it. We've explored everything, from buy some land ourselves, wait for further opportunities, partner with someone else, or repurpose something. And after going through all of that, none of them work. I was offered Te Pātaka, which is the Highbury library, when the rate was really, really good. And I was excited about that opportunity, but that all fell through because the proposed relocation of that service to Te Aroha Noa didn't go or hasn't moved forward, and I just needed to move on. I inquired about Tākaro Park because it already had an existing car park, and it wasn't heavily used during normal business hours, but that went nowhere. I investigated land owned by Kainga Ora. They were prepared to sell us vacant land, but those offerings were slim and it would have taken us out of the hybrid community. We looked at extending, and that wasn't an option. And we were also offered a formal kindergarten in Alexander Street, Awapuni, right next door to another kohanga reo, the Whanaunga Ray Karini, so that wasn't an option at all. And so with all of this circling around, we did land on Opi. Now, contrary to popular belief, everybody, in our opinion, largely forgot about Opi Reserve until we asked for it. And to be honest, it isn't the most desirable piece of dirt in the city, situated in the bowl of a cul-de-sac with poor streetscape, dated dwellings. It is essentially Highbury. I was asked to go away and develop a concept plan or a drawing of what the site would look like with the aspirations of Hiniote, and someone was also to counter-propose what a housing development would look like across the entire site also. I do have a concept plan of what it would look like under Hiniote, and all I can say with regards to a counter-proposal is that there's going to be some houses on it. There's a few things we'd like to be certain of. Would like to be certain that if we are only successful with half the land, that the conversation remains consistent for the balance to be placed in housing only. And we feel that if this is a conversation about housing, that also remains consistent, that because we intimately know this community, and that if it is going to be developed into housing, then I have to be clear that there isn't an adequate suite of offerings to support families, and the offering should be made for singles or the elderly. Now, in saying all of the above, I would still be happy if only half was granted, but I need a decision today of yes or no so I can move on. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you, Chris. Those comments are very helpful, certainly for me. I just have one question. So obviously it was suggested to you that it might be more, you might have more success with half the land rather than all of the land. Was that some advice given by staff in relation to maybe the political decision making around it, and so it was perhaps more confidence around getting half than all of the land?
100% correct, Alicia. That exactly was the driver as to the advice that was given to me, that I would be more successful in asking for half as opposed to the entire site, because the political environment around what is happening in the housing market or in the housing sector, well, one for a better way, and I don't really want to belittle anyone by saying it could be used as a political football for political campaigning. And I felt like I was a collateral damage as a part of that moving forward, and not really taking on board what the aspirations of Hiniote are asking for.
Okay, thank you. I think you've made your point very clear that your preference is for the whole piece, but that half would be gratefully received as well.
Absolutely, with the caveat though, because the conversation should and still remain consistent, because in the last meeting, if I can just say, there were some comments about other user groups and other clubs also looking for space, but that shouldn't be relevant in this conversation, because this conversation was either all for Hiniote, half for Hiniote, and the other half or all for housing.
Yeah, Absolutely agree. Thank you. We do have some questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and tēnā koe, Chris. And thank you very much for coming to make public comment. I think it's been very, very helpful. I just wanted to ask about the forward projections and planning around capacity of the kohanga and future needs, I guess, in the community. So from the basis of my concern is if the decision goes to only give you half, like how many years is that going to keep you going for before you're going to need to expand further? So are you able to just comment on that?
If the decision is only for half, we will be able to maintain a number over 20 to 30 years without a problem. The modular design for the new kohanga reo services can start at 25 and go all the way up to 80. So based on the approximate piece of allocation for the kohanga, which we would allocate, if we are only to receive half, that would be enough area for us to both meet the current needs that we have, the future projected needs that we're looking for, as well as future projections of numbers. I just need to also circle around this because we, as you all know, are heavily involved with the Kāka Tangiata development as well, and there is no offering in the entire area for kohanga reo services. We're at Iniote.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing I just wanted to get you to expand on is the other aspects of what you were hoping to develop in terms of an urban marae. They would not be possible at all on half of the section. So in other words, that those aspirations around, you know, Marakai and Manaakitanga and all the rest of it, that's not a possibility because if you only had half of that reserve, because presumably that half will be totally taken up with the kohanga reo.
Correct. If we were only successful in half the land, then that entire allocational parcel would be for the kohanga reo and the kohanga reo purposes. The balance or the additional aspirations of Heniote would not be able to be realised, and it would become a disconnected realisation somewhere else.
Yeah, totally. I totally get that. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and kia ora, Chris. Thanks for coming in, making some comments. In the report that we'll be considering shortly, it talks about the fact that currently the kohanga reo has a capacity, or its licence has a roll cap of 18 children. Now, I'm just wondering, obviously you've expressed some aspirations of it growing well beyond that. Why has the licence currently got a roll cap of 18? Is that related to facilities? And are you confident that if you had bigger facilities that you would be able to increase that cap, or what determines that?
Chris, you've just muted yourself.
Sorry. Kia ora, Karen. There's a formula which is worked out by the Ministry of Education as well as a number of other education departments for schools, for tertiary universities, right down to ECE kohanga reo. The current size of our premise only allows us a roll of up to 18. That's also measured by the outdoor space which is needed to support the indoor activity. So as a part of our build of what we did for our current site is we leased, I think it was about 5 to 6 metres of tui park to enable us to at least extend from what we were going to be granted of only 15 to 18. and that there was only enabled by us being able to lease more land, outdoor space from the Tui Park. When we originally put in, I'm just going around, we were actually given the whole of Tui Park, but we didn't want the whole of Tui Park. We just needed what we needed, and we were just given a little bit of Tui Park to be able to bring our roll up to 18. But unfortunately, we're at a time now where we just don't have any indoor space to be able to extend or grow.
Okay, and just quickly, one further question on that. So if council was to allocate half of the reserve today, do you have an understanding of what sort of number cap, what your capacity would be for the Kohanga Reo in that space?
Yeah, we'll be looking for a kohanga to enable us to future-proof it for 60.
60, okay. Thanks, Chris. Ngā mihi.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and kia ora, Chris. Chris, if you were given access to all that land, do you see the possibilities of being able to have a housing development there as well? And I'm thinking in terms of elderly people.
Based on, kia ora Susan, ngā mihi o te ata, but based on our current concept plan that we have, it wouldn't allow for housing on the site.
Is that because you've only looked at half the site, or is that the whole development looking at your urban marae?
Yeah, it's a circular internal corridor amongst the iwi, and to be 100% honest, housing for Rangitane is not our priority.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and kia ora, Chris, and thanks very much for your kōrero. Look, can you just give me some comment, please? I'm just thinking some comment just around if the whole site was allocated, just some comment around the potential for the integration and support to the wider Highbury community in terms of amenity.
Kia ora, Pat, ngā mihi o te ata. Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to kaumātua, kuia, te reo Māori offerings, as well as after school programs, we would see we would dub this area as the Hiniote hub for us to be able to offer integrated services to the community. I made a phone call to Kāinga Ora around what their aspirations were looking for this entire area, and they agreed that whilst part of their plan is to increase the supply of houses, they also realise that when the increase of supply does impact within a community, it limits the offerings or the suite of offerings of support services to those communities also. So they were really excited about our concept. Of course, they're going to take whatever land is offered to them and build houses on it, but they are equally 100% supportive of what we're trying to do in terms of offering wraparound services, integrated services for the community of Highbury.
Great, thanks. That's very helpful. And I just wonder if we could just perhaps just get some contextual sort of comment from you just around the educational outcomes for tamariki who attend Kohanga Reo.
Yeah, so the outcomes at this stage, we are graduating from our sector, from the early childhood sector 6 annually, and pathwaying them directly into the local schools. We've worked with the other schools or kept a close eye on what's happening within those schools to see whether or not the pathway from Kohanga Reo is a right fit to those current schools and what's being offered in those in the current community, which is Tākaro as well as Te Kura o Wairau, formerly Somerset or formerly Highbury School. However, they have set up and established units to receive Kohanga Reo kids to make sure that their pathway into primary education is well supported. We have a strong relationship with our local kura kaupapa Māori or Manawatu, where typically 95% of Kohanga Reo children will end up by going, which is a full total immersion school environment, and that's based in Rhodes Drive, Kelvin Grove. What we've done internally, and it has been approved by our National Trust, which is the Kohanga Reo National Trust, a subsidiary trust in Māori medium education, have an approved 4-year-old program. Most ECE programs don't really work on what I remember when I was a child, a preschool, a preschool sort of checklist of knowledge, what needed to be taught prior to getting to school. So we have our own internal 4-year-old program which develops certain skill sets of our tamariki before they actually get to the new entrant teachers, taking them on to the specialist tasks of reading and writing and literacy and whatnot.
Kia ora, Chris. That's very helpful. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and kia ora, Chris. Thank you for coming in and talking with us today. So you've spoken a little bit about the importance of the Kohanga Reo, which is, I guess, your minimum aspirations at the moment for the minimum amount of land that is required. With the other portion, you talk about the marakai and the whare. I was wondering if you're able to expand a bit on the importance of those aspects for our community.
Morena Renee ngā mihi o te ata ki a koe. Yeah, that's a really, really good question. The urban marae or the marae has been a long-held aspiration and dream of Hiniote for a long time. Our last marae, I may have mentioned this in other conversations or in other hui, was arsoned in 1925. So we are approaching 100 years as a hapu in 2025 of not having a marae of our own. We've been looking and have been looking for a number of years to build a new marae for ourselves, and we found that this site or the balance of the land would lend itself nicely to be able to realise that aspiration. Having a kohanga reo, having a marae together grows and enhances the well-being and the mauri ora of our whānau. And it's right in the heart of our community where the majority of our Hiniote whānau live. We have some aspirations also for the marae. We know within the sector that we work in, which is the Māori community, that we don't have a large offering of marae to whānau, to community, to groups who do visit this region. We are quite poor when it comes to teams accommodations. I've advocated for more teams accommodations here, and we don't actually have any supply or support for teams when they do come here. We feel the marae on this location would be a perfect fit because there is a large sport park directly across the road in Monrad, as well as there's some basic shopping just around the corner there with fish and chips currently being offered out of the Highbury shopping complex and a really cool bakery. However, those sorts of things aside, this is about the well-being and the mauri ora, the growth, the development. This is about Te Reo Māori revitalisation. This is about welcoming communities. This is about our tomorrow, and this is about realising the aspirations of Hiniote.
Cool, thank you. That's very, very helpful. And the marakai aspect of that, how does that fit in? Because that's more than just a veggie garden, isn't it? Are you able to expand a bit more on how that sort of connects?
Yeah, so the marakai would act as a pātaka food cupboard for the community as well. So as part of these wraparound services of offerings, which we really want to do, we do kind of offer them out of the front office of Mai Kohanga Reo. However, it's not adequate. But you're absolutely right. When we talk about marakai, we're not just talking about growing some lettuces and some cabbages. It's about the mātauranga which comes with that. It's about being able to celebrate the different seasons. It's about being able to share the mātauranga with local visitors and people coming from other regions, as well as being able to reteach our own on location at the marae.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. It's been very helpful, Madam Chair.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you. Kia ora, Chris. Just a very quick question. I think you partly answered it, actually. I'm very supportive of giving the whole site to you, particularly to see a marae put in place there in Highbury. That would be a very modern facility, and it would be available to the community as a whole as well, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, 100%. I think we just need to be really clear when it comes to marae that marae are for community.
Yes.
The kaitiaki of the marae will change depending on the region or the whereabouts or the location of where you go to. So in this instance, this marae will most definitely be a community marae. It will be open and available to everybody. The kaitiakitanga of that would sit with Heniote. So we know what we're getting ourselves into. We're taking on a responsibility where we can't disconnect ourselves from that, but such is the nature of having a marae.
So the city would end up with a very modern facility in the middle of Highbury there for the community of Highbury to use. Thank you, Chris.
Kia ora, Lou.
Kia ora, Chris. There's no further questions for you. So just so you're aware, we'll receive your public comment, and then we will go to the minutes, which should be very brief, and then we will be having the paper on Opie Reserve come up. So if you want to stick around and hear the kōrero, then you're welcome to do so. But thank you for making time to speak with us today.
Ngā mihi, thank you.
Right, so I will move that the committee receive the public comment for information, seconded by Councillor Hancock. Thank you. Are there any comments? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make some comments without I guess, getting into the substance of the paper that's to come. And that is that it's been hugely helpful to hear Chris presenting and answering questions. And I know for myself that not being able to hear directly from Chris was one of the reasons why I was reluctant to make any kind of decision last time round. And so I just want to express how helpful and how grateful we are to, or I am certainly, and I think everyone else is, to hear from Chris, because that gives us much more confidence in our decision making going forward. And I think it was really great that he was able to come in and do that. So thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, Madam Chair and staff, for arranging that, because that was really what for me was missing when we were trying to make some decisions previously. So I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. I also just wanted to make a quick comment on a point that Chris raised in his comment, and that was in regards to the advice that he had to focus on securing half of the land. And I'm not 100% sure where that advice came from, but I just want to provide a perspective that I actually think that it's really useful for people in the community to be aware of the priorities of council, and that information was given because actually this council has got a very strong priority on housing, and this is a community which would benefit from, you know, some substantial housing development. We know that, and so I think that actually it is really appropriate to give some advice to people who are coming to I guess inquire around leasing reserve land, to say that actually this council would likely consider part of that to be used for housing. Obviously, you know, there's a wider conversation to be had, but I do just want to acknowledge that I think it is really appropriate that advice is given around the priorities of council, or the political environment that we're working in, because we have been really clear around what we're wanting to achieve as a council. Right, with that, I will invite you to vote. We'll be voting by a show of hands. All those in favour? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Councillor Micallard, have you opposed? Is that just to be clear? Or did you just leave your hand up?
No, Madam Chair. Sorry, I think I voted in favour. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Right, that has carried unanimously. Moving on to our next item, the confirmation of minutes from our 9th of March meeting. So there is just one amendment, which is minor. We'll correct that ourselves. That is just that the meeting did not happen in the council chamber. It was an audio-visual meeting. Apart from that, are there any questions on the minutes? Great. I'll move that the minutes of the Planning and Strategy Committee meeting of 9 March 2022, Part 1 Public, be confirmed as a true and correct record, subject to amending the location of the meeting to an audio-visual meeting. Can't see people on my screen, so I don't know if anyone's happy to second that. Thank you, Councillor Johnson, seconding that. Thanks, Carly. It's a little bit tricky jumping between screens where you only have a very small offering of elected members above you. So I will, is there any comments on the minutes? Give you a moment to rush into the queue. Great. I will invite you to vote by a show of hands. All those in favour? Any opposed? Any abstentions? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Right, moving on to item 6. Just before we get into this, I will just let you know, so we are essentially going to be taking item 6 and item 7 together. We will take questions on both item 6 and item 7. Item 7 is the original report that we had come through in November. And then in terms of process, once we have dealt with questions, we will receive the supporting material that has come through today, which is essentially item 6. We will lift the November report off the table, and then we will move into comment once we have got the original item 7 in front of us. Hopefully that is clear for everyone. But any questions on 6 or 7 can be dealt with together. So we have got Kathy David-Todd, Group Manager of Parks and Logistics, on to speak to this report, and I'll hand it over to you, Kathy.
Thank you, and good morning, councillors and Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to present the report. I'll take it that you have read the attached information, and with the original report, in light of the comments that have been made this morning, I'd just like to draw your attention to some matters contained within that report. So firstly, in relation to the report, there are essentially 5 options, and those options range from using the site, leaving the site with existing use, right the way through to a mixed use and exclusive use options. And the concentration around the discussions this morning have really been around options 2 and 3, which are a mixed use option for community purposes and housing, or exclusive housing use. To make it quite clear to councillors, in section 5.22, it is quite clear around that option that Ngāti Hine Ōtu ideally wished to lease the site when we first prepared that original option. And on behalf of the Chief Executive, as officers, we make recommendations to you based around the strategic direction of council and policies and plans. So I'd like to draw your attention to section 2.9 of the report that makes it quite clear that an action that was determined by the council or resolved was that under the city growth plan was that council investigated underutilised reserves, whether they could be partially or fully purposed for housing. So the recommendation of councillors here is based on that strategic direction, and in particular that action within the plan. There is no doubt that both options 2 and 3 have very good strategic fit with the direction of council. And in terms of the advice provided to Ngāti Hini-Oto, I wasn't party to that conversation, but really, as the chair has advised councillors, we're really looking there at the direction of council at the time, which is that action. And so I would determine, rather than saying to Ngāti Hini-Oto, you would have more success, we are saying that we are going to recommend as officers this option because it aligns with the direction that has been given to us by councillors. Certainly the option that has been put forward, option 3 for exclusive use by Ngāti Hini-Oto, is probably somewhat the easier option for council. It will be the one that will get the quickest resolution. The reason for that is that we would be looking there under the Reserves Act to change the purpose of the land from its current recreational use to community purposes. And both the Kohanga Reo and the urban marae are consistent with that under the Reserves Act. However, in all cases, there would be still the need for Ngāti Hini-Oto to work through a RMA process. And as you are aware, that is effects-based, and so that is not just about the buildings and the development, but the use of the site, the activities that occur, and the effects on the surrounding environment. So that process would still have to occur. Under the housing mixed option, it is somewhat more complicated because as has been highlighted earlier, housing, whether that is within an urban marae setting or whether it is exclusive for some other kind of housing, is not consistent with the Reserves Act, and the reserved status of that parcel of land to be used for housing would have to be uplifted. That's probably all I wanted to just add at this point, but I'm open for any questions that councillors may have.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you for that clarity as well. That's really useful connections to be making to our own strategy that we've been signing off. First up, we've got Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Kathy, for your report and your comments. I've got a couple of questions. The first one relates to figure 1, which is on page 23. And looking at that, it seems to me that the Highbury shops and the label that says existing Kohanga Reo are actually in the wrong place. Because my understanding was that the current Kohanga Reo is in what those of us in Highbury call the Highbury shops, which are those on Highbury Avenue. So am I correct that there's a mislabel there?
You could very well be correct. It does look like Tauihi Reserve there. I'm sorry, I can't. The diagram I've got in front of me is very small. I can't clarify that for you.
Okay. So anyway, so just to be 100% sure, the current Kohanga Reo is alongside Tauihi Reserve in the Highbury shops on Highbury Avenue, is it not?
That is correct, and as Chris has highlighted earlier, the Kohanga Reo has a lease of part of the Tauihi Reserve to ensure that it has the ability to meet its outdoor requirements for its licence.
Okay, then in that case, you haven't confirmed that. I think the labels are misleading. So I'll just draw that to attention of elected members in case they're confused about it. In regard to the current use of OP Reserve. My understanding is that it has been for quite some time just a kind of a grassed area with nothing on it. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is consistent with a number of reserves we have throughout the city, and they are used informally, so we don't have any data on how they're used, but basically they are an open space. One of the differences with OP is that it is used currently as an access way. So people move between the ends of those two cul-de-sacs using OP Reserve as well.
Yeah. So how long, do you know I guess, no, okay, I won't, that's all right, I don't need to know that, it's not going to help with the decision making. So in terms of granting the lease for the Kohanga, if we were to determine that we wish them to have the whole parcel leased, do we need to make a determination at this stage about length of leases, or does that come later?
Yes, that comes later. We would probably be looking at that under the council's leasing policy. But as you have experienced recently, councillors, there's been a couple of reports come to council where we've looked at slightly different terms outside that policy. But I think what's really critical here in your decision making is there has been no community consultation on this to date. So we do have requirements under the Reserves Act to consult with the community on the proposal to enter into a lease. Normally, when we consult on the proposal to enter into a lease, in effect, that's the council's preferred option. We normally don't talk at that stage about the length of the lease, but quite often during the consultation process, the applicant and other members of the community come forward with information that might inform the length of the lease. So, for example, they want some surety that if it's going to be used for that, that is a long-term lease, is a common public consultation comment.
Okay, thank you. I'll just leave it there for now, Madam Chair. I might come back into the queue later. Thank you.
Great. Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Kathy, for this report. Can I just get a little bit more clarity on, I guess, the size of the portion that, if we were looking at doing half of it kohanga reo and half of it housing, that size that's left over that we would be looking at housing, does that mean, I guess, in terms of size, we would be looking at around 4 sections? And with that and the issues with Crown, would we be then looking at only getting half of the 4 sections? Is that how that works? Or is it that half is the kohanga reo and then the half with the 4 sections, that would be Crown land?
So draw your attention to recommendation 3, which really talks about looking at the housing development options and bringing that back to council. There's nothing in this report that has investigated whether that be sections or whether that be, for example, council-owned housing, the likes of what we've got at Papaioia Place, which is quite a different proposal to sections. So the involvement with Kāinga Ora around that is really what is the need in the community. So those sorts of things haven't been investigated.
Okay, I'm just trying to work out in terms of the size of that parcel of land, how that actually compares with, I guess, other offerings that we've had throughout the city. As an example, you know, for me, just looking at it on a map feels like that's about a quarter of what's available in the Summerhays development, as an example. I'm just trying to get a gauge of how does that compare to other areas that we could turn into housing, scale-wise?
Yeah, so it is on the smaller size. On the traditional sections within the city, it's probably only 3, but obviously we now develop smaller sections, and so it could be in the order of 5 to 6 if you were looking at it from a pure sections point of view.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And my final question was around, I guess, the current maintenance of that bit of land. If that ended up being leased to the kohanga reo, would that mean our maintenance budget for looking after that land at the moment would reduce?
No, not really. It's a very small piece of land adjacent to a very large reserve, and really the mower comes off one reserve, passes down and over that one, a very quick run, and moves on to the next piece of park that needs mowing in the suburb. So really, in terms of the mowing run, it wouldn't make much difference. We wouldn't notice that in the maintenance budget.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Finlay. Councillor Finlay? Okay, we'll go to Councillor Naylor.
I think his screen is frozen.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Kathy. Kathy, you mentioned in your introductory comments that options 2 and 3 both fit the strategy of council. In the report under the details of option 4, on page 29 under bullet point 5.27, it also in the report talks about option 4 fitting with council strategic direction. Has your view, I'm just trying to understand if you still consider that option 4 aligns with our strategic direction as well, or I'm just trying to understand based on your comments today if there's a change there.
No, you're right. It touches on one strategic direction of council, but certainly the other options cover more of the wider strategy of council than just a pure housing option would. Okay, and in terms of the detail of in that option where it talks about if the full amount was used for housing, that over 30 houses could be built if there was a multi-unit approach, can we assume that that would mean if we went with the half and half option that around half of, could we build 15 houses with a multi-unit approach with half the land or not? That's probably something that would need to be answered by our planning representative. That is much smaller, would be a much smaller portion. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can assume that if half the site's there, then or half the site is used for housing, then approximately half of the number that was suggested for multi-unit could be delivered on the balance of the site. Okay, thank you. And just one further question on page 21, where it talks around on point 2.10, the housing capacity assessment that identifies 5,000 additional houses will be needed to be built over the next 10 years. I'm just wondering, in terms of the identified areas where these houses can be built that have been identified so far, how are we short, or have we identified enough areas that we can address that full capacity? So that's not a question that I can answer. If I can hand that over to David. Yes, Councillor Naylor. So the work we're doing on the broader growth program around Kaka, Tangiata, Kotiri, Ashurst, Roxburgh Crescent, Napier Road, those areas are sufficient to accommodate the projected growth over 30 years. Great, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick check on if we decide to give the whole of the reserve, would that hold things up at all, or could it just go through as it would be if it was the half?
Sorry, Councillor Finlay, I missed the middle of your sentence. I didn't get the volume.
Oh, sorry. If we decided to give the whole reserve instead of just half the reserve, would that slow the process up, or could it be done just the same speed?
Certainly from the Reserves Act point of view, both the urban marae and the kohanga reo would require us to look to change the purpose of the reserve, and both would be considered as community purposes. So there's no difference from the Reserves Act point of view. The Reserves Act point of view, process could also include the leasing process, so the proposal for the lease. That is no different in this case either. So both half and full on the full kohanga, full Ngāti Heniotu option would take the same time in that first stage. It would be somewhat different, however, in the consenting stage, because they're very different activities from a Resource Management Act point of view.
A question for David, probably. With Housing New Zealand rebuilding a lot of houses now in Highbury and repurposing houses in Highbury, is there still a shortage of housing in that location?
Look, I can't speak specifically for that location. I know that there are significant housing waiting lists across the city, and the conversation we've had with Kāinga Ora is that they are generally supportive of the recommendation. That's not to say that they wouldn't be supportive of option 3, full use for the Kahanga Reo, but certainly I can't answer that specific question other than there are significant waiting lists for housing, and as I said, Kāinga Ora have been comfortable with half the site being used for housing.
Thank you.
Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This is probably a question for either the Chief Executive or for David. It's about, Chris mentioned putting a marae in, and I just wondered about the number of maraes that we would have for the city, and whether there is, with a strategic intent going forward, how many or what is the number of maraes that we would be looking to have across the city?
I can answer that question. I don't think it's appropriate for the council officers to have a view on the appropriate number of marae within the city.
Okay. So would that just be coming from our manawa whenua? Is that the approach that we would have?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Sorry, Alicia, you are on mute.
Are there any other questions before we close questions off? Great. Thank you, Kathy and David, for that. So we are going to move recommendation 1 and 2 together from item 6, and I will read those out quickly. So it is that the committee received the information from Ngāti Hiniotia, Hapu Authority and Kāinga Ora contained within the report titled Further Information on Use of Opi Reserve, and 2, that the report titled Proposal from Ngāti Hiniotia, Hapu Authority, Kohanga Reo to relocate to Opi Reserve dated 10 November 2021 be lifted from the table. I can only see some of you, so can someone volunteer to second? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. So we are just voting on recommendation 1 and 2 from item 6 at the moment. We will come to the original report in a moment, but we need to lift that off the table before we can actually debate it. So is there anybody who wishing to make comment on these 2 recommendations, the additional information we have received and 2 lifted off the table? I'm going to assume you're in the queue if you're wanting to speak about that. Councillor Beattie? No. All right, people just got fast fingers for the next item. With nobody wishing to, I'm assuming you're just jumping in line for the next item now. Right. With nobody wishing to comment on 1 or 2, I will invite you to vote with a show of hands. All those in favour? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, that has carried unanimously. Now moving to item 7. This is the paper we received in November. Sorry, just before we go into debate, Kathy, can I just have you confirm that this paper, item 7, is the paper from November? There haven't been any amendments to it?
That is correct. As it was laying on the table, it has not been altered.
Perfect. That's exactly what I thought. Thank you. So we've got some recommendations. I am going to move option 3 as the recommendation that we adopt, which means that recommendation 2 and 3 are not required at this stage because they were around negotiating housing. Thank you. And Councillor Johnson has willingly agreed to second that. So I'll just make some brief comments. I do see a number of you in the queue. Look, my preference is that we go with option 3 because we have got the opportunity to support the aspirations of Ngāti Hiniaotea. And I think in terms of our obligations under Te Tiriti, our partnership with local mana whenua, that actually what we should be doing as a council is, where possible, enabling the aspirations of local iwi to come to fruition. And right now, I think we actually have that opportunity. I know that we have got a really clear desire to increase the level of housing within the city, but I think that we have other opportunities to enable that to happen. And so I think with OP Reserve, as we heard from Chris's public comment, there was very little interest in this piece of dirt, as he described it, until this discussion happened. And of course, as per the direction we have set, staff have explored maybe a light touch with housing, but I think actually right now we've got the opportunity to put a kohanga reo there, to put an urban marae, to put whatever Ngāti Hiniaotea aspire to have there, and right now we've got an opportunity to enable that. So I think that it's a brilliant opportunity for us to do just that, be enablers, and so I am really hoping that we can see option 3 pass with success today. Right, I will open up comments. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. People won't be surprised that I absolutely support additional housing in the city because of the issues that we've got. But this particular Highbury site, one size does not fit all. And I mean, I thoroughly support Huria Street because of the surrounding environment and the type of housing that's there. And I think that is a really good site for housing. OP Place is in the heart of Highbury, and we actually have an opportunity when you look at Goal 3 to connect our communities in there. So this is not, it's weighing up our housing goal and our safe and connected communities. And here's an opportunity for us to do good in that area and work with our partners, Rangatani, to come up with, I think, with something that would be really quite unique for our city in this area. So surprisingly, I actually support option 3. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Beattie. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm speaking in favour of option 3, which is to lease the whole reserve to Ngāti Hiniaotea. And the reason is that I think we really need to be looking to the future here. This is about aspirations over the next 20 to 30 years for the hapu. And I was really taken by the opportunity for community development and community services and addressing some of the social needs in our suburb that an urban marae on this site would produce. And there is not, I understand the officers being cautious and saying we haven't gone out to public consultation, and we will do that. But this is not a piece of land that is, needed for a park. It's basically a mown piece of grass next to the Kawe stream, and there's the huge Monrad Sports Park, a stone's throw away. So I don't think leasing the reserve is a particular loss to the community, and in fact, quite the opposite. I think some of the facilities and services that Ngāti Hiniaotea will be able to offer from this site will be a huge advantage to people in Highbury. We do have, a very high proportion of the Māori population living in Highbury. we do have some social needs that need to be addressed, and this is an opportunity for those as well as for the Kohanga Reo to expand. And it is a good location. It's very close to the centre of things, to the sports field, to the shops, to the library, and so on. And I'm very supportive of enabling community groups to realise their aspirations. And that is also one of our strategic directions. So yes, I understand and I support the need for housing, but this piece of land, if we reserved half of it for housing, it wouldn't add very much to the sum total of housing in the city, but it would detract from the potential that would be available to Ngāti Hinioti if they were able to use the whole piece of land. So I really think that we should be supporting this proposal for the whole piece of land. And whilst I understand officers have tried to balance competing strategies, in this case, I think the need for community development wins out here over the very small increase that we could potentially make in housing if we were only reserved half of it. So really do ask you to support this, councillors. It's a once in a generation opportunity for Ngāti Hinioti Hapu, who, as you have heard, have been without their own marae for nigh on 100 years. So let's help them get that sorted out.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too want to support this recommendation of option 3. I am passionate about looking after our reserves, and I'm passionate about looking after our housing and making sure that we have more housing in the city. But when we are looking at repurposing reserve land for housing, we need to be very clear on the benefits and negative impacts of that decision. OP Place, like other people have mentioned, is located down a quiet cul-de-sac that doesn't get as much use as the other destination parks. When you've got Monrad across the road, it's still within walking distance to Takaro Park. It's slightly further to Farnham Reserve and Bill Brown, but it's still very close to those parks as well. So in comparison to even those 4 parks, OP Place is a bit meh. I fully support Ngāti Hinioti Hapu Authority Kohanga Reo to go into this space and have full use of that space. And part of that is because the Kohanga Reo is so much more than a daycare centre. It's an organisation that works with whānau to revitalise and strengthen te reo Māori and tikanga. It's a language nest where they nurture children from birth to 6 years, totally immersed in Māori language and culture and customs and values. And as an Indigenous person who has struggled with my own native tongue, that is so important to people. It is not having that connection with your own language causes huge disconnection with your own culture and with your own people. It is disempowering, and it makes people struggle to find their place in the world. So just the Kohanga Reo bit is vital. It's vital for our community. And we know that that this one has a proven track record of success. They've clearly outgrown their existing premises, so they need to expand, and they have looked at so many other areas. So this organisation gives Māori children the best start in life, and OP Place is the best place for them. When I think about the options that they're looking at for the other half of the marae, the whare could make a huge difference in the community, to the wider whānau of the children using the Kohanga Reo, but also to the wider community and connecting everybody in that space. I can see their vision of the marakai, the food garden that would enable the transference of traditional knowledge and practices and connecting those older generations with the younger generations. And that in itself will have countless health benefits. I can even envision the rain garden and native plantings that they're envisioning. That would end up encouraging biodiversity and making that space far more environmentally friendly than an open field. So I would like this council to fully support the Kohanga Reo's moemoeā, their dreams and aspirations. I don't want to box them in to a limited amount of space where they would only be getting their bare minimum of what they are wanting to achieve. So we could continue to be a good treaty partner, and it wouldn't even cost us more money because, you know, in fact, we would even get a small income from making this decision. So I say, let the Kohanga Reo lease the full reserve, and let's focus our housing efforts on bigger, more appropriate spaces like Huia Street, like Summer Haze, because this space is not actually appropriate for that housing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was originally in the queue to move option 3. So just to say, from previous employment I've had, I spent a lot of time in that area, and the total fit is there for option 3. So I'll just be in fully support of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Finlay.
No surprise, I'm totally supportive of option 3. Ngāti Eneo have not had a home for over 100 years. And as you heard earlier on today, there is nowhere else within their hapu, if you like, where they could have a marae. This is the last opportunity for us as a city to allow this to happen. So I am 100% supportive of giving the whole reserve to Ngāti Eneo 80, because for the simple reason, it's our treaty obligation and nothing else.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, as the last 2 speakers, it's a great fit, and I think Councillor Finlay summed it up. It's what we should be doing. Just want to take you back to Chris's mum, the late Lorraine Fitzgerald. And I know it was a long-held aspiration that's gone back decades, really. And I can recall her coming to see me not long before she passed away, and it really was quite emotional, how she wanted a marae, along with all the other educational community facilities. So, yeah, we should do the right thing. So I'm in full favour. Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to make a comment? Great. Well, I have read the recommendation out, but we will have that come back up on the screen. So we are voting on option 3, which is the full space lease to Ngāti Haniotia. Actually, no, I have not read this out. I'll have to read that out quickly. So we recommend that the council adopt option 3, exclusive use, Kohanga Reo, all of Opi Reserve is leased to the Ngāti Haniotia Hapu Authority, Kohanga Reo, subject to the Reserves Act 1977 process. I have moved that, seconded by Councillor Johnson. I'll just wait for you all to jump back on my screen. Lovely. And we'll vote with a show of hands. All those in favour? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Very pleased to call that a unanimous vote. Thank you, councillors. Right, moving on to item 8. We have got the update on the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan. We should have, yes, we've got David Walton on the call. Perfect. Hello, David. And David, I'll hand it over to you to present your report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Worship the Mayor, councillors. Good to be back in front of you again. We've had a number of stalled attempts to do this. So it's great to be with you today and give you a quick update on where we're at. I'm going to take the paper as read, but I think in terms of opening comments, we spend a lot of time thinking about the what, the how, and the when, and often get down rabbit holes on those sorts of details. And I'd just like to stop for a minute and talk about the why. Why are we doing this, and what's the significance of it across the board? This is an interesting project because, in one sense, there's nothing new about it. All the elements of this project have been in train across the council for a period of time. They've all been started, they've all been looked at, they've all been worked on, whether it's the library, Te Manawa, the Globe, the city centre, Streets for People. There's all the projects have been running in different forms and different time frames and making progress or stopping and starting. Some of them are under pressure because there's seismic issues and so on. And the council's exec, when they approached me, started to think about looking at this in a more integrated way. And we pretty much sat down and hoovered up all of these different reports and requests from councils to report back on different issues at different times, and said, what would it be like if we actually upgraded the overall master plan and looked at all of these elements together to actually look at creating a heart of the city that was not only a civic and cultural centre, but actually provided the impetus for economic development, for talent development, for education, and actually put life back into the heart of the city rather than it being the dead centre of town. It was actually the live centre of town. And how could we do that most effectively? So we sat down and pulled a scope together that looked at all of the material, and if you recall back in 2019, we actually brought that scope to council, and that was used as the basis for us to go out to market through the procurement department at the council and gets for tenders for applications to work on developing the city centre. We had 7 really good applicants, and I think the council should be really pleased at the quality of those. A reflection on them in detail indicates that all of the top entities in New Zealand pretty much were part of the tendering process in one form or another. I'm talking about EY, PwC, KPMG, Bosley's, a range of architectural firms, JazzMax, etc., etc. So a lot of the companies were involved across the board. They were reviewed by an independent tender group that was chaired independently, shortlisted, and then the tender committee interviewed the 3 best candidates, and we included Rangatani in the review process and an external independent auditor, and as a result of that, the Arup Consortium was awarded the tender. Interestingly, the 3 top tenders were all within a few $1,000s of the price, though of course when we did the initial awarding it was on a 2-envelope system, so we didn't know that when we were picking Arup, which was the best of the 3 prices and the best of the 3 presentations. So that group, which includes PwC, Bosley Architects, WT, project managers as the collective group, have been involved in the process. To date, we've had to do most of the work by video, remotely. And I'd have to say everybody's been exceedingly accommodating. We've done full Marae meetings last year with Rangatani, and all of the participants, instead of attending on site, came in from various locations by Zoom, and all the council and various entities have had interviews, workshops and one-on-one programs as we've put together their aspirations and their requirements into an overall integrated view. As a quick update, I was really pleased to be part of a workshop yesterday where there was a complete interaction of all of the different entities participating on scenario options for a framework for the future of the city. I'm talking the library, Te Manawa, the art gallery, environment network, Manawatu, economic development unit, etc., in terms of all of the different aspirations and requirements and being fed into them. And that's the material that will be presented to council at the workshop in, I think, the 11th of May, where now that the borders open, there will be all of the different players will be flying in to do that presentation with council, hopefully face to face with full detail. I'll leave it at that, Madam Chair. I'm more than happy to answer any questions or update people that would like an update.
Thank you, David. We've got a couple of questions. The first one is from Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, David. Just a couple of questions. On page 39 of our papers under communication, it talks about regular dialogue between the Arup team and stakeholders. Can you tell us who the stakeholders are in this?
So there's probably two answers to that. Obviously, there is a direct group of stakeholders who are the entities whose facilities will be most directly affected, which would be, for example, the library, Te Manawa, Globe, the art gallery, and so on. And then there's a broader group that are involved in communications and information sharing that would have a wider interest in the group. And that's quite a long list. I think Jono might be on it, or Keegan maybe in the meeting. There's a long list of people that we're just providing information to. And Arup have actually just engaged an additional communications person who's ex-council, ex-local, to provide a better general dialogue in terms of local communications.
So that's quite a general answer. Would we be able to get a list of stakeholders that are being engaged with?
Certainly, we can get you that, and we can arrange for that to be circulated after the meeting.
Thank you. And then my other question is around whether options for accommodating some of the needs of our multicultural sector have been considered, because I think there might be some confusion around when we're talking about cultural facilities. So some of the comments that I've had from the public have been around, are we intending to have space, I guess, for the multicultural sector, or is it just Maori cultural needs that are being considered? Are you able to answer that in any way?
Yes, there is a broad cultural facility being provided as part of the facilities that are being looked at. It's being done, obviously, all of the work's been done with Rangatani as a partner in this process, but there is a broad cultural facility in the centre as well, as is a broader look at residential, and I'll almost say, and the more boring things like archives and compliance with Public Records Acts and how we're going to manage all those facilities, because they could all be integrated at the same time.
So for instance, would Manawatu Multicultural Council be one of your people that you're liaising with around the cultural facility?
I can't tell you the list off the top of my head because the information's going out, but we'll get that information to you. And if they're not there, we can certainly include them. As different people have come up, we've added them onto the list if there's been quotes and oversight where people have been interested.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, David. How many hours to date have been spent on the project?
Wow. that would require an awful lot of work because you basically got the teams of people working on it outside of here, plus Auckland, but plus the Palmerston North staff. So there've been people in Auckland and Sydney and Melbourne working on it. There've been PwC have been doing financial analysis as part of getting ready for the business case, which is the last part of the process. So I couldn't give you a total number of hours. I guess we can ask the ARIP consortium to get a number for you and present it as part of their information in May, if you would like that.
I think it'd be really helpful to just give us an understanding of how much work, a breakdown would be really helpful. Thank you, David.
More than happy. Yep.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, David. The report on page 37 refers to the original direction that Council gave in April of 2019, that the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan be referred back to the Planning and Strategy Committee with the intent to undertake public consultation on the plan as a draft, including library options, costings and timeline. And just being refreshed about that direction, I'm really struggling to see that translate into the scope and the expression of interest that's also included in this report. I'm just wondering if you're able to explain how that direction is given effect through this process that's been outlined in this report.
I'll give you my take on it, Councillor Naylor, and David Murphy or someone might provide a purer process answer. But the intent here is to actually produce a document that allows the council to take it to the public to actually look at the scenario options that come out of this in terms of a future framework for the city centre. And those are what you would be consulting on, and that would provide you, if you run the project through, to giving indications of what the costs would be and what the deliverables would be and what the timeframes to implement it would be. Can I just remind you that this is actually creating a master plan or a framework that allows the city to work over a period of time as money and desire works through, so that the pieces can be done in an integrated way. This is actually, the advantage of this is that it's actually a live entity, and so we're not actually saying this is concrete going to be poured. It's getting ready for people to understand what that whole integration is and what the principles are behind why things are going to go, or suggested where they would be.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, thank you, David. If I could just add to that, Councillor Naylor. So while the original master plan was really well received by council at the time, it did not include an option for the library, and that was identified as being earthquake prone late in the course of the development of that original master plan. And it didn't include options, costings and timeframes, and that was one of the pieces of key feedback that the council provided us at that time. You know, what was this going to cost and how would it be delivered? So in order to meet that resolution that was passed at that time, that was one of the drivers for undertaking this work. So this work will include library options. It will include costings and timeframes and how this project will be delivered. The other component part of that resolution was that it's reported back to undertake consultation. Now, in order to undertake consultation on a master plan, you need a master plan. You need a master plan with options for library, and you need options. So we don't have any of those things. We didn't have any of those things at the time that resolution was passed. As David said earlier in the process as well, there was a heap of sort of disparate projects being undertaken across the council that weren't being done in a collaborative way, or a connected way or integrated way. So, for instance, there was a separate work stream looking at the library, so that's all come together now. So, in short, the work is an explicit response to that resolution.
Okay. So in terms of whenever there's consultation mentioned in this report, there's no mention of public consultation. It seems like there's a lot of discussion of consultation with stakeholders, but at what point do we expect to go to our community, which I think was the intent of that direction, and seek their input as to whether or not this is a priority to them to even invest in and proceed with?
It would be my thought that once you've got the key stakeholders have put their input into it and their recommendations have come out, then you'll go to the wider community. So what this process is about is ensuring that the needs and aspirations of the library, Te Manawa, the art gallery, the cultural centre, plus looking at the requirements globally in terms of what provides dynamic city centre. So there's look at convention facilities, there's looking at hotels, residential, plus the city's requirements for archiving, etc. They're all being put together, and when that's available with the information, then it will go to the community to say this is what's being proposed, and these are the recommendations of those who are actively involved in providing you with those services, whether it's the library or the art gallery or whatever. So the answer for me is that you would go to the community once you had that information, and you could provide them with some realistic choices and timeframes and options and some visuals of what the city would look like if you did it.
And when did you think that would happen?
That's due to be done this year. Will be or stage 2 will be finished by July, and subject to council approving the final stage of the budget, that will be done in the second part of this year and be finished by November, December.
Okay. Just moving to the financials on this, and on page 38, it talks about this being a 3-year program, and it also talks about that the sums for this were covered in budgets going back to the 2021 year, this year and next year. Now, as I understand it, the only budget that was approved for this program is in the current year for 250,000. Yet the report is indicating that there were sums covered in other budgets, even last year, that perhaps weren't identified through our annual budget process. And just through some of the questions I've asked, that's come back to me recently, and from what's written in this report, there was 200,000 that was spent in last year's budget. And I'm just wondering, what was that work to pay for? Because I understand that the contract only got determined in May and signed in June. And was that 200,000 payment for work in advance, or was there actually $200,000 worth of work done in June last year that justified that $200,000 payment?
Two answers to that. There was work done through May and June because the contract was awarded and they started work straight away. It wasn't signed because the detail of the contract was negotiated through with Arup and was not formally signed until June, though they had started work on it well before that. The prime reason for the delay in signing that was to reschedule the back end of the work so that there was a stop-start position at the end of June this year, because there was no budget formalised for the 22-23 year, which is what needs to be formalised now for the final part of the project. The 250 for the current year had already been approved, and Council Executive had 200,000 in the budget so that they could start the work straight away. So it was work done to mobilise the team straight away and to get the work going, and that was done through May, June, and the establishment budget. We actually agreed to that because we also negotiated the price down from their original price and removed the risk out of it. So the council agreed that that would cash flow the difference for them on that, so it reduced the cost of the contract.
Okay, just further on the cost, because I understand the price for the consultants has been identified as the two parts, the 490 and the 200. In addition to that, what is the full cost of this work expected to be, including the project management and officer time?
I can't give you the breakdown of the officer time from a council point of view. The tender for the contracts was set as part of the process. It's approximately 650,000 in round figures, but that was split out when we negotiated the deal because council hadn't committed budget for the last 200, which was the 22-23 financial year. So there is no commitment to the contractor for that. It would just mean the last part of the work wouldn't be done if that budget wasn't approved.
Okay, so I'm not sure.
Can I just ask how many more questions? Because my intention is we take a break at 10:30.
I do have a few more questions, but I'm happy to come back.
We'll take a break now, and we'll come back. And Councillor Naylor, sorry, you'll be first in line for questioning when we return. So we will be back here at 10 to 11. Go back to you for to continue your questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just three main areas that I just wanted to finish off in terms of my questions. The first one, David, you mentioned in your introduction about the scope coming back to council in 2019. Now, this is the first report we've had that has come back to council or this committee in 3 years. And I'm just wondering, are you talking about when the scope was brought to a workshop?
I think it was a workshop. David might have to help me on that. I remember it was about August 19 is my memory. We've had, I don't know, Councillor Naylor, maybe 3 or 4 efforts to come back to council in the last 6 months that for a range of reasons didn't eventuate. So this is not a reflection on a desire to report to council. I think a number of you will be aware of that. Madam Chair may in fact recall some of those discussions. So some of it's been COVID related, some of it was some other investigations that were being done, and so we've kept deferring this reporting back. So I think we'd all agree that the time frame's been too long before reporting back, but it hasn't been through a lack of intent or a desire. There'd be nothing else beside that.
Okay.
Just to clarify too, the workshop was August 2020, so it was 19 August 2020, not 2019.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I thought that was the case. And just, no, I'll leave that till comments. The next one, just going back to the financials on page 39. Now, the budget sum required for 22-23 being 200,000. Obviously, I mean, that hasn't been included in our draft annual budgets at this stage. But if that was, I'm just trying to understand the order of things. You said just before to an earlier question that the public consultation would happen later this year. Now, I'm just wondering if there's to be public consultation later this year, would that happen before or after the business case is developed?
I would recommend it's after the business case, because that would allow you to consult on, because the business case is actually intended to look at what the option scenarios would cost, but also how the delivery would be done and what the cost benefits would be for each of the different ones, because obviously some of the more expensive scenarios may require different funding mechanisms, e.g. commercial funding, but may provide a greater return. So the community needs to know that. So I said that it would be done later this year, i.e. after the business case had been done and the final reports had done. And that may go into the calendar year 23 rather than, I meant this year as in the 22-23 financial year.
And just, can I just, sorry, Councillor May, can I just clarify something there? I think with this project, there will end up being 2 phases of consultation. So there'll be consultation on the master plan to help refine the options and a potential preferred option. However, we all know that funding decisions and the delivery of council activities is the preeminent process for that is the long-term plan. So the next long-term plan is 2024. So while there'll be some consultation as part of this process, I also anticipate that this project and the different component parts of it will form a significant part of the consultation and the options for the 2024 long-term plan. And that will need to happen regardless of the council's views on the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan, because effectively do nothing will not be an option because the library in Timana and other things are earthquake prone. So while there'll be consultation, there will also be and one of the things, sorry, that the long-term plan, one of the last process, Audit New Zealand provided us some feedback that we did not embrace a legitimate conversation with our community about options for key issues in the city. This is a significant issue for the city in that we've got major community cultural facilities that are earthquake prone and require investment. So consultation as part of the next LTP will be a significant part of this project.
Okay, just thanks for that. Just coming back to the financials, I asked earlier what the overall cost was, including project management, staff resource, etc. Now, David, you mentioned people from Auckland, Sydney, Melbourne, and PNC staff coming into that workshop in May. Are those additional costs, or is that all a part of the ARUP contract?
That's all bedded in the ARUP contract. Part of the negotiation was to remove all variables on that, and it was bedded in the contract. So it was a fixed price because we felt it was more important to have certainty over the number.
Okay, and is the project management cost included in that as well, or is that over and above the ARUP?
The project management costs for council staff, etc., will be additional to that. I haven't got the budget numbers for that. I'm not sure how that's done internally within the council.
So has anyone got those budget numbers, or has that work been done? Like, are we looking at more than $1 million or less than $1 million? Like, I mean, I don't feel like we've had real good clarity as elected members as to what this piece of work is actually costing our ratepayers, and it would be good to have a bit more specific clarity on that.
So the only additional operational costs over and above the ARUP contract is the project director fees, which is in short David's role. So we don't anticipate those to be significant in the overall operational budget in any one year. There is obviously staff time. We have John O'Ferguson-Ply as the city planning manager as project manager, and then we have Keegan Aplin-Thane, who's doing a lot of the grunt work with stakeholders, probably spending about maybe 2/3 of his time on this project.
Okay, thank you. And just my final question relates to the status of the Civic and Cultural Precinct draft Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan that wasn't adopted or approved by council in 2019. So it is included in a lot of the documents. I know I've brought this up a few times before, and officers have agreed that it should be not being referred to as an adopted master plan, but it seems to still be included in here. If I look at page 48, for example, in the appendix, reference documents to be used as background, Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan, and nowhere in the document, nowhere in this paper do I see it referred to as a draft, and nowhere in this paper do I see it acknowledge that it actually wasn't approved by council. And so what is the actual current status of that draft master plan that wasn't endorsed by council?
I can answer that, David. It is a draft, and it's referred to as a draft on page 37.
Okay, so in terms of the OI, the expression of interest and the scope documentation, though, it's not referred, like, are the consultants working on this piece of work actually aware that that wasn't agreed on or adopted by council? Because in nowhere in that scope is that referred to in that way.
Yes, they're aware of that, and they're basically working with all of the stakeholders broadly to try and create a new integrated plan that goes beyond that draft plan, because as David Murphy said, there were elements in that plan that weren't considered that are integral part of this plan, of the new proposal. And the new proposal is much broader than that and actually looks at the commercial and economic developments for the heart of the city in addition.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll leave it there.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. G'day, David. Haven't seen you for a little while. Nice to see
I know.
you, even if it is online.
They tell me you've caught the bug, mate.
Oh, we can't say that publicly, but yes, I got the COVID cold. Look, but back now. Look, if I could just comment, Madam Chair, on 3 questions, please. One around the project management, the finance I'll just briefly go through, and the communication, which is probably the main one. So just, David, in your report, mainly on page 39, and we talk about the project management, and appreciate we've got some of the best minds, seems like, in the world on this project, but it's going to have to be enacted locally. So I just want to know, where's the local, we've got to have local investment. Where's the local component? Where's the Councillor Johnson asked about where the multicultural. I mean, we've got churches in the middle of our CBD. Where's the bid? Where's the Retailers Association? Where's the Chamber? Where's the Commercial Property Owners group as well?
So a lot of those are included in the list of stakeholders or communication people that we will send that circulation out to, Mr. Mayor. There has been wide conversations with the economic development arm of the city and looking at that. There's been meetings set up with some of the property owners around the centre of the city to see how they would want to interface with it in terms of direct conversations with the project team. So they have actually been having those conversations with individual entities, including the convention centre and other property owners along Main Street, for example.
Okay. This is a question and you may choose to answer it or not, but shouldn't they actually be on the project? Shouldn't there be we've got many master plans that we're doing. We always try and catch all of those people. And I know it can be quite hard with such a wide-ranging group of organisations and people, but shouldn't they have a representative on the project group? Fair call, and we can certainly broaden the project group. I think the workshop I was on yesterday had about 30 people on the group. So it's a case of where do you draw the line practically in terms of trying to do it. But you're absolutely right. We want to actually get a representative feel from a wide range of people on this. And what you'll also find is that, for example, the PwC property people have had conversations with CBRE and a lot of the commercial property people that are operating in town on an active basis. So there's a lot of threads to this in terms of feeding the information in that I think there's a very genuine effort to actually give something for Palmerston North that suits Palmerston North, that reflects something that will be vibrant for the future. And so there's a real genuine effort to try and get that feedback. So that's my comment earlier. If we're missing someone, we need to make sure we get them. And we have been trying to do that as we go through. Yeah, look, I'll leave it to comments, but I just do wonder if there is a missing link there, David, and probably from a commercial angle, but also a community angle as well. Some of the other questions have come through. I think Madam, a lot of the commercial conversations, there may be one or two community groups, a church group, or for example, that we may have missed. And part of the appointment of the new lady, David, help me, it's Kathy, I can't remember her second name, but the councillors probably remember her. Or John McCartney. Yeah. So that we've tried to get some more local knowledge so that we haven't missed anybody in the discussion. Sorry, David, you cut out then. You mentioned a name. Kathy McCartney is the local communication person for Arup. She's working with a lot of the community groups as well. Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, she's doing the engagement part of the work for Arup.
Right, thank you. Just on the finance, it's been well teased out, and look, I'm not going to, it is what it is, but obviously management, not council, management decided it was going to be in stages, and I realise that some of those decisions have been made by people that are no longer here, but the actual contract signed, which I've noted, I had to go and find it actually, on the council website, was for 690,000, is that correct? Thought it was 660 something, Mr. Mayor, but okay. I have to check that. And it was split over the 3 years to allow for the consultation and the feedback as part of the process. It's actually going to be struggling to get it done by Christmas now with the COVID delays, but understand that. Yeah. No, that's been well sort of pulled out through questions and answers. Thank you. And I think thirdly, and I think this in order of how I've asked you these questions, the communication. I suppose where's the councillor oversight on all of this? I appreciate that you've tried to get to us, and you have tried. I know that, and for various reasons, it's got in the way. But this is the first time publicly that we've heard about the tripling of the budget, a few other things, and it is what it is. But where's the councillor oversight in this?
Well, I'll be the first to say and agree with all of you that we wanted the council involved actively in this 6 months ago or more. So it is what it is. What we're keen to do is actually catch up on that now. This meeting went from March to April to May sort of thing, and the May presentation with Arup will in fact give the councillors an overview of what is being considered and what the feedback is, and that then gives the councillors the opportunity to decide whether they want to put the last 200,000 into the budget for 22-23 or whether they don't want to progress it. And it was structured that way to give the councillors that ability once they started to get a feel for the work that was done, as opposed to making a decision at the front end when you don't actually know what the master plan might starting to be looked at. So it was a conscious decision to give the councillors that ability to make that decision on partway through the process, so you didn't spend more than you wanted to, subject to what progress was being made.
Thank you, David. That's good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, could I just clarify that the first request for a council workshop was late October 2021?
Thanks, David. I think that's been well sorted. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Councillor Finlay.
Oh, thank you. David, when the first plan came up, I think, what was it, back in 19 or something like that, I had a look at it then and I made a comment and I was just sort of pushed aside and said, oh, that's irrelevant. But I'm having a look at this report and looking on page, 3, you have a whole list of organisations and community centres and commercial people, residential living inside the city centre, hotels, all those sort of things. And then when I go to have a look at your map on page 8, in Main Street, there's a yellow council-owned bit of land with some parking at the back of it. Now, of all the lists that I've gone through it, you've not mentioned anywhere of the senior citizens of the city. Now, that bit of that hall there is the senior citizens hall. And it is used by sometimes in a daily 4 different groups in a day. But you've not mentioned the 20% of the people that they represent. Can I ask why?
Probably just an oversight on my behalf, Councillor. It was interesting at the workshop that we had earlier this week that there was significant conversations about senior citizens, about mobility requirements, and about children. That we often forget about children in city centres, and we need to actually be thinking about accommodating facilities for them. So those conversations have been had in the workshop, and you'll see that coming through on the presentation next month. But
so there has been some consideration of older people.
Correct.
Thank you.
Some of us fall under that category, sadly.
Just.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, David for this report. So when I look at the resolution that happened in April 2019, that actually happened before I became a city councillor. So I'm just trying to, I guess, get a bit more clarity around the timeline and what exactly is happening here, and just trying to work out when is it that we would be consulting with the wider community? I did hear you mentioning something about the end of the year or possibly the end of the financial year, and I was just wondering actually when it was that we would be consulting, and would we be doing something like we did with the BPO where you had the booklet with the 6 options or whatever? Is that what we're trying to do?
So I don't think if I work on the assumption that council agrees to the last 200 and we do the business case, etc., I'm mindful that there's also elections. So that was part of the timing that we've now delayed. We'll be running through that. So if you assume that it would be November before the material was available and council was operational again after the elections, it may well be that council decides that it's more appropriate to do the broad consultation in the first quarter of 23 prior to any further action. And I'm just being pragmatic on that. But the report is due to be finished in the 22 calendar year, which would mean that consultation's probably in the first part of the 23 calendar year.
Okay. And so
what it looks like, I mean, that hasn't been defined, but the material would be used that's coming through in the workshops now to provide the public at large with an understanding of what's proposed, why it's proposed, and what the different scenarios might be in terms of consider them options or scenarios, cost-benefit conditions.
And so I guess from a finance point of view, sorry, are we putting aside any money at all as a placeholder for this, for the earthquake strengthening work? Or are we looking at doing that in sort of the LTP process following that?
There are a range of budgets in the LTP to address the earthquake-prone status of council-owned buildings already.
Cool. So is it more of an issue of trying to find, I guess, the design of how we would end up spending those budgets, or would it be when this consultation comes out, we're looking at probably more money to be able to do the things that we want to do?
My own view is that there'll be a lot more money if you do everything that's proposed, and it's really a case of whether the city wants more residential facilities in the city, whether the master plan's all about how you want things to look and where you want to spend the money. And does council want to upgrade the library or just earthquake strengthen it? It's a case of saying what goes where and why do we want to do it, and is that the best use of how we spend the money? So it's all about a plan as to how you spend the money that A, needs to be spent, and B, might be useful to be spent. I think the important thing to realise is that this plan's based really around, there's some money that the council will be required to spend. There's some money that the council may wish to spend because it's council or civic responsibility in terms of cultural, library and associated facilities. And then there's a lot of money that may well be spent because council becomes the catalyst for a city centre redevelopment. And so you then get commercial development associated with that, whether it be hotels, conventions, office space, etc., which is part of this integrated whole to actually get that interest coming through.
So I guess one of the things that I'm kind of I guess wanting a bit more clarity on is if we end up and I know it's been delayed because COVID and all the other issues.
Councillor Dingwall, can you please ensure that your questions are concise and straight to the point without the commentary? We're still in comments. There'll be an opportunity for, we're still in questions. There'll be an opportunity for comments, but we do still have 4 items on the agenda and have another meeting starting at 1. So we need to be concise, please.
Okay. So in terms of the buildings that we know are earthquake prone, if we end up sort of delaying the consultation the way that it is at the moment because COVID and all of that, would that put us in a position of not actually being able to do all of the 12 buildings that need earthquake strengthening in the time frame that we've got, given that the time frame keeps reducing the longer we hold off since 2019?
I think you'll be fine because you're going to have it done by the next LTP, and you can't do it much before the next LTP. So you put both those two together, you'll be okay. From memory, it was about 15 years from 2019 when the earthquake issues were raised. So you've still got enough time irrespective.
We might just have a comment from Bryce. He's over this issue as well, and he's just jumped in the queue.
Yes, thank you, councillors. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
New headset, so that's good. Yeah, so basically for the buildings like Te Manawa and Central Library that are earthquake prone within this sort of district, we've currently got them planned in years 8 and 10 in the current LTP. So we've intentionally rescheduled them and stacked them in a way that that allows this work to be done thoroughly first, so we can get some direction and inform what that solution will be. The only one that we are looking to progress with in the immediate sense is the CRB, which has a number of relatively simple things to be dealing with, and we're looking to kick that work off next financial year.
Cool. Thank you. That answers my questions.
Thank you, David and Bryce and others who answered questions. And that concludes questions. So I appreciate you going through those in the detail. So we've got a recommendation that the committee resolved to receive the update report titled Palmerston North City Council Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan Update for Elected Members as attached to the memorandum titled Update on the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan presented to the 13th of April 2022 Planning and Strategy Committee. I will move that. Look for a seconder. Can only see some of you. Thank you, Councillor Hancock, seconding that. I'll open it up for comments. I will just reiterate that we are now pushing time a little bit. We've still got a few items on the agenda to get through before we break for lunch and move into arts, culture and heritage. So I would request that you keep your comments concise and straight to the point so that we can ensure we can get through as many people who are wishing to speak as possible. I don't want to limit comments if possible. Councillor Naylor, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, we've been waiting for 3 years for this, so I do think it needs a bit of attention and time, and but I will try and keep my comments concise. Look, I was pleased to receive the report. It certainly had to be asked for to come back sooner, and despite officers' comments that October 21 was the earliest that a workshop was asked for, there were many of us who have been asking for this report to come back sooner for quite some time. And certainly even going back to August last year, there were a number of us that were asking for this report to come back sooner. And officers were saying, no, it has to be December, then it has to be June. So look, it's a bit frustrating when we're told, yes, there's definitely a COVID element to why the work's been delayed. But in terms of the informing of elected members, I think that we have a very poor example of having to wait far too long for feedback to come back to this committee. 3 years is far too long. And certainly my comment around workshops is that we need to be clear that workshops are not a decision-making forum. Yes, we were shown the scope in August of 2020. Some of us indicated strongly that we were not comfortable with the scope and that it did not align with council's direction. Yet we do not have the ability to make a decision when it's just a workshop. So I am disappointed with the way that this has the delays and the way that elected members haven't been well informed of progress. I must say I was actually quite shocked with some of the information that was in this report. Being told that it's a 3-year program was a big surprise to me, when actually we've only ever considered as elected members one-year program, that being this year a 250,000 program. So to be told that 200,000 was spent last year, and I understand it was being paid for in the governance and active citizenship budget, I don't know why we had an extra 200,000 sitting in that budget that hadn't been allocated or wasn't assigned to some other work. But for me to find out that that was spent without any elected members oversight is a very big concern. The fact that the budget looks like it might be 3 or 4 times what we had been originally considered last year is a huge concern. And I think we need to be follow this obviously in other forums, perhaps through the Finance Committee, but we need to have a much more awareness as elected members. If there are budgeted programs, if they are to significantly exceed the approved budget, then there needs to be some communication back to elected members to ensure that the direction that the work is on actually aligns with the intent and our understanding of what it is that we've asked for. Now, I will be voting against receiving this report. I'm glad to have received it, but my concerns are go quite broadly in terms of the fact that I don't think that the current work aligns well with Council's original direction. I agree that we do need something to provide our community to when we're consulting, but this goes way too far in terms of a case. This talked last August about concerns around scope, around cost creep, and definitely what I'm reading in this paper aligns with those concerns. I'm disappointed about that because I don't think our community would have supported what looks like could be close to $1 million of investment before they even get consulted. I think we need to also be better about including the officer time in the programs that are identified. When the project management and the officer time is not included in the identified programs, and it's on top of that, and when we ask questions, how much is that actually costing, and no one can answer that, then that's a really big concern to me in terms of our accountability to our community for how we spend their money. So I think I'll leave it there. Certainly, I think, you know, as much as I've commented in past meetings that this was a draft, it still seems to keep ending up in our documentations as if it's been approved by council. And certainly of the officers' comment that it was well supported at the time just doesn't stack up to the fact that it wasn't endorsed by council in 2019. Many of us were significantly concerned about the costs, and that's why we asked for that additional information. If we had known that that might be going to take 3 or 4 or even 5 years to get to our next long-term plan, that's 5 years before we properly consult our community. That's just far too long. For something that we just needed a little bit more detail to get feedback from our community before we considered proceeding. I think we've really missed the mark in terms of the direction that this work is going, and I think it needs a rethink.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I just check that I'm being heard okay?
Do you want to pull your microphone down, Councillor Bowen?
Thank you. I was just checking you could hear me, so that was good. You can now, I'm assuming.
We can.
Thank you. But absolutely hear the concerns raised by Councillor Naylor there around budget and transparency. And I also support, I think, some of the concern being raised by the Mayor about the role of elected members in the direction of this piece of work and being involved in the steering committee. So do support those comments. However, your colleagues will know I've long been a supporter of this project. I actually support what the officer said when he said that this project had been well supported by elected members, because originally it was successfully brought through committee and then was discussed again at council, and it was that point it was the elected members asked officers to provide some more information. So at its heart, there's nothing new about this project. This is Te Manawa, which we've been talking about through the last long-term plan. This is the work on the library, which has been through the long-term plan. This is Streets for People, which has been through the long-term plan. The individual elements have all been consulted on and have been well supported by our community. What we've asked officers to do was to bring in the additional work about the library and to pull it all together into a programme where we can make the final programme greater than the sum of its parts. And I absolutely support us doing that, because in doing that, my hope is that we leverage external commercial and government investment into this space. If we don't have a good plan, then we certainly won't do that. But as Mr. Murphy said in his comments, doing nothing is not an option that is open to us. in this space because many of these buildings are earthquake prone and the clock is ticking. So really, elected members, if we are worried that it's taken this long, we really only have ourselves to blame because we asked for the additional work and we asked for additional consultation on top of individual project consultation that has gone already. There is the pressure of seismic issues. There's an opportunity to take an integrated approach. I wish it was happening more quickly. Of course I do. But there are reasons why it hasn't. And some of those reasons sit squarely at our door and not necessarily with the officers. And on that basis, I'm delighted that we finally got this report in front of us. And I'll be delighted to see this project proceed into full consultation through the LTP with some community consultation before that, because whatever happens, it will need to be done. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I agree with actually parts of both the previous speakers. And I just want to go back to, and I want to thank David Warburton for bringing this forward. And I do know you have tried to get in front of us a few times. So that is quite truthful. In the sense that you started, the project manager started his presentation about, and I don't disagree with why, and I think Councillor Bowen was going down that track of why are we doing this work. And actually I was in the majority of councillors, it wasn't unanimous, but the majority of councillors that suggested we lead this work. And I still think we need to do some of that. But it's how we've got here, which is the disappointing thing. It's the disengaged process. That's been, all the questioning has come out in that place. It's the tripling or quadrupling of the budget without any transparency with us. And look, that's where I have the issues. The contract has been signed. We're under delegations, and look, that's happened. We've just got to accept that. So it's how do we influence it going forward? And I think that's making the best of the situation. Councillors have spoken about some buildings that we've got some real issues with, which we need to sort, and that is very true. But there's also a lot of private investment around here, and we're not going to get it or do this work by ourselves. We know that. So I believe we need, how does council get better control of the situation going forward? Because this is the first time publicly that this has been aired. We need better communication and oversight on the project. And it sounds like there's a bit of catch up coming, and that's going to happen. So that's great. Number two, local input is absolutely, necessary. And I think some of the councillors alluded to, we need on that project team, and we need wider community input to that. But we also probably need an elected member too. We know when we have an elected member, the conduit comes back to council really well. Papiaoia Place, Hiara Kotahi, Arena, all good examples of where that worked extremely well. And I think this could help as well. So we're missing a few links. We need community group input, and that's around our multicultural community, our senior citizens, our city mission, our churches. They need to be in the conversation somewhere, not stuck on the side as a stakeholder. Same with the commercial groups, and they're well listed. The bid isn't anywhere to be seen, yet they pay rates in this part. We've got the city, Central City Property Owners Group as well, and I know they are absent at the table as well. So they all need to be there, and I think council needs a thorough update on this more than just this report. And I do know that the project manager and others want to do that. So it's really how do we get control of this? If we just let this slide, councillors, I remember the 1970s when there was a city centre plan. It was run by consultants and officers, no council input, and that didn't end well. So we've got an opportunity to do something really good in the city. We're going to make the best of a situation which has been handed to us. This is not a council. We haven't done this under delegation. This has been done to us. So we've got to make the best of it. So I'm quite happy to support the report, and let's get on and see what we can do going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just make a final comment as, I guess, right of reply as the mover. Just to remind councillors that every decision to be done to be so far has been done within the Chief Executive's delegation. So there might be concerns around budgets moving around or financial decisions made, but every decision to be done has happened within the Chief Executive's delegation, of which we set. So if there are concerns around the Chief Executive delegation, then we need to address the delegations that we give the Chief Executive. But actually, this is not the time to say that there are concerns around not little, but individual pieces of decision making that are already within the scope of what we have designated. So I would like to highlight that. In terms of the report not being thorough enough, we requested, the full report is due at the end of the year. That has been on the work schedule. That has been very clear, whilst not always accepted, that has been very clear to elected members. We requested an interim update. That was agreed to be in June. That, again, has been on the work schedule very clearly, that an interim update, which was going to be a much more thorough update on where we are to date, coming in June. This was never set as a thorough update or an in-depth update. This was always going to be a light touch update because it was called for in addition to the update that is coming in a couple of months. So I just want to remind elected members that the expectation is probably too high for this report. It was always going to be a brief, light touch update so that we could maybe give people some clarity or comfort in the fact that the process was ticking along. But it was always due for a proper update in June. In regards to the process as a whole, there's certainly been aspects that have been drawn out, as has been highlighted by Councillor Bowens. Some of that is due to us. The Mayor and I had the request for the workshop come to us in October, and there was a lot going on at the end of last year, and we requested that be deferred until the new year. And then obviously we've got this little thing called COVID that is interfering at the moment and all sorts, but we will get there with that workshop. But this process reminds me to the Arena Master Plan process, in which prior to the Arena Master Plan, we had several strands of work to be done at Arena. It was a bit more of a piecemeal approach, and what was agreed that actually we would pull all of those strands together to have the Arena Master Plan. And that reminds me of where we're at with this. It was very much many individual strands. We had the Library of the Future project. We had Te Manawa 2025, I think, was the original vision for Te Manawa. We had the earthquake issues that were just kind of overlaying some of these other pieces of work, plus a general conversation around things like whether we wanted a urban marae, what our opportunities were for our conference and function centre. There were so many individual strands, and these have all been pulled together, much like the Arena Master Plan. And that process also was a wee bit drawn out and had many facets to it. As the Mayor has alluded to, it did have an elected member involved in that group, and there was some real benefit to that. So I do think we've got an opportunity there to consider that. But I also don't think that this paper right now is the forum for us to make those decisions. I think that actually with our update and actually with our final report coming to us at the end of the year, that's when we can really clearly articulate how we want to manage this process moving forward, what oversight we want to have, and what that looks like. And I guess at that point as well, we'll have a really clear understanding of who our stakeholders are and what degree of involvement they have, because some of them are going to be perhaps much more in a partnership approach, and some of them are going to be stakeholders, and some of them are going to be people that we just engage with to get their views. So there's still many opportunities to explore, but this certainly was just a check-in report, I guess, because the interim report will actually be coming. It's currently on the work schedule for June. I heard David mention May a couple of times. I'm not sure whether it's May or whether it's June, but either way, we do have scheduled an interim update coming, and that will be a more full picture with some more detail around where we're at with this. So with that, I am going to put this to the vote. We have had a division called for it, so I'm going to hand it over to Sarah, I think, to do Sarah or Carly. One of them will take us through the division, and I'll hand it over to you two.
Okay, division on item 8 to receive the report. Councillor Harpeter.
Against.
Councillor Finlay.
Against.
Councillor Naylor.
Against.
Councillor Hancock.
For.
Councillor Beattie. She might have left. Councillor Dennison.
For.
Mayor Smith.
4.
Deputy Mayor Rutherford.
4.
Councillor Bowen. Sorry, Councillor Bowen.
4.
Councillor Meehan.
4.
Councillor Butt.
4.
Councillor Barrett.
4.
Councillor Johnson.
4.
Councillor McLeod.
4.
Councillor Dingwall.
4.
Councillor Petrinas.
Against.
Okay. That's 11 for, 4 against, and 1 abstention.
Thank you, Sarah. Right, we're moving on to item 9 on page 53, the Arena Master Plan Review Process and Governance. We have got John O'Ferguson Pye, City Planning Manager, and John Lynch, Venues Manager, to present this report.
Madam Chair, can I just, I'll leave now, but thank you for your time. And
thank you, David.
Can I remind you that it is scheduled for Wednesday, May the 11th, for the full presentation where people will be flying in to give an overview of the whole thing for councillors.
Thank you. Right, we'll hand it over to you, Jono and John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure if John's online there. Welcome, John. So, morning to the Chair, Mayor and councillors. So, I know you're busy, so I'll keep my comments as brief as possible. Just a couple of things. Obviously, the purpose of the report is to seek councillor direction on the governance structure of the Arena Master Plan project. So essentially, what we're seeking is whether the review of the Arena Master Plan should be directed by the Arena Master Plan Steering Group, or whether the Arena Master Plan should be directed by council. Look, the report purposely hasn't gone into the detail of what is the scope of the master plan, or looking at the terms of reference, except to say that we note that it's likely the review of the Arena Master Plan is likely to be a relatively light touch and update. And then obviously the terms of reference would have to be updated if the committee were of a mind to appoint the steering group as providing the governance structure for the project. So I'm happy to pass back to you, Madam Chair, if there's any questions.
Thanks, Jono. We've got a question from Councillor Dennison first up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to explore the possibility of combining both the input of the steering group, because that worked well and their input was vital, alongside council's input, and combine the workshop and have a combined approach. I just wanted to get your thoughts on having that to get a solid outcome.
Look, I can attempt to answer that question, and David Murphy might want to fill in any gaps. I guess one thing just to consider is, my understanding is that the purpose of the steering group last time was sort of at the implementation stage of the project, whereas this is around that strategic planning stage of the project. The feedback that I've received, and I wasn't closely connected with this work, is that at the implementation stage, certainly the steering group, that seemed to work really well. As to whether the steering group would add similar value at the strategic planning stage, I guess you could test it and find out. I guess you're not going to know until you try, but yeah, certainly the steering group was successful in that implementation stage.
Okay.
I think just to add to that, Councillor Dennison, if it ends up being the steering group, it'll probably end up being the steering group and the council anyway. If we look at recommendation 3, ultimately the steering group wouldn't have the authority to approve any review of the master plan, so it would come through council anyway.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back and comment if there's any, once questions are done. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hapata.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask John if there's any projects going forward in this LTP that he could outline for us.
Good morning, councillors. There's only one project which is part of the current LTP, and it is a very small budget. I can't remember the exact amount, but it's less than $100,000, I think, which is part of the new Southern Grandstand. Some money there to start some work and doing some concept plans, etc. But no actual delivery money as such.
So what about the fundraising for the grandstand? Who is in charge of that?
At this current point in time, that hasn't been looked at or activated.
So who's in charge of that? What term of the long-term plan is that in?
Well, that will fall with our, I'm not sure of his exact title, but under our fundraising manager within council.
As in the next long-term plan, not this long-term plan?
No, the next long-term plan is when that funding is required.
Okay, thank you for that.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In terms of leading the review, is there precedent within council practice in terms of steering groups leading their own review?
I'll be honest with you, Councillor. I don't have a lot of knowledge about processes that in the past that have involved that, but I guess I'm currently working on a couple of projects where that is the case, or not so much leading, but closely involved in driving. I think it's always good to have those that understand the needs close to a project. It depends on the interpretation of leading, I guess, but.
Thank you.
Could I just, sorry, Councillor Barrett, could I just jump in there? So I think the report talks about that, the fact that a master plan is similar to, say, a strategy or a plan or a policy, and that it directs council investment or decision making. So that's typically being provided by, that direction is typically provided by council as a whole on those types of documents. However, I think what we're saying, here, as Johnny said, that this is a relatively light touch review, and the group has provided some, some involvement in early parts of the process. The other point I would say is, for instance, if we look at the, council had a briefing last week, I think it was, it might have been the week before, the weeks will merge, on Te Utanganui, Central New Zealand Distribution Hub, and the master plan that we're developing there. So that was about, council direction into that process. There is a broader reference or steering group on Te Utanganui, but that's about the broader connections around the project, around Kiwirau, Waka Kotahi landowners, Rangatane, and their involvement. So in short, a master plan is similar to a strategy, a plan or a policy, and the direction comes from council.
Thank you both. Jono, can I just follow up in terms of your response? You indicated that there are some other examples where the steering group was central to, at least, the review process. Could you identify a couple examples there, just for a point of, I guess, relativity or comparison with where we're at in the arena?
Yeah, look, I guess if you look at the steering group we've got in place for the Silviculture Precinct, that is working well, given the members there have a very close interest in the decision making there, but also I guess are able to feed in the needs of their organisation, but also they're also reminded that we're talking about a whole of council approach here, and an approach that needs to meet the whole of the community, not just their individual needs. So I think with steering groups and how close some of those steering group members are, I think it's just a matter of reminding people, hey, we've got you here to feed into this process because you understand the needs of your activity or your function, but also please bear in mind you're part of a steering group that's looking at the broader needs of the council and the community also.
Thank you both. Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just a question regarding the wording of the first option on recommendation 1. In terms of the decision-making framework under the Local Government Act, I had understood that we couldn't make decisions in workshops. So what is the direction that is suggested there that could happen through a workshop? Is that able to be clarified?
I think Councillor, oh sorry, David, you go.
You go first, Jono.
Oh, look, Councillor, I was just going to say, I mean, we go to a workshop or a briefing to seek direction on a project from councillors, but obviously we take that away and work that into the work that we're doing. But obviously, ultimately, it always goes to full council for approval.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you, Jono and John and David as well for that. We've got no further questions. So, councillors, we've got options, I guess, in our report in front of us. I'd like to move option 1A, I guess, the first part of that recommendation. So we'll strike out or and everything after or, and recommendation 2 is for noting, I guess. The reason that I'm wanting to move the first part of option 1 is I think that the steering group, that doesn't exclude the steering group from feeding in or providing comments or thoughts. But I do think that it would be worth bringing the council together actually through a workshop to have a discussion around this and set some direction that can then come back through committee or council for full sign-off. So I think that gives us an opportunity to have a proper conversation about it. If we were to go straight to committee, we don't always get the opportunity to have a proper back and forth discussion. It's a bit more questions and then debate. And so I think that the workshop gives us the flexibility to really talk through some of those opportunities or issues that may be coming up. So that's what I'll move. Is there anybody who would be willing to second that? Councillor Hapara, thank you. And I will open up for any comments. Sorry, just going to jump to Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. Take my hand down now. I think there's a lot of value that the Arena Master Plan Steering Group can offer, and that's why I was inquiring around whether the input can be included and combine those workshops or workshop. In the recommendations, it's noted as a plural, but to have us shoulder to shoulder, I guess, just hearing from those users. I wouldn't say that they were just part of the delivery. Many of them do have a deeper knowledge in the strategic work that's been taking place to date, and their thinking around that would, I think, aid what we're trying to do for the update of the plan. And I'm sure they'd only be too willing. And certainly going through that meeting process, so where it had the and or, I know that follow-up or has been taken out, so we'd have workshops and the report to planning and strategy and subsequently to council. So I just really wanted to promote the earlier input of the Arena Master Plan Steering Group. And rather than doing consultation on a one-off basis, which will happen anyway, to have them around the table. And so not there's an openness to actually have that included in that recommendation that you've moved, Chair, around provided by council, supported by the asset management steering group via combined workshops. I was just see if there was any others that would have a support along that theme, and then ultimately, when it comes to the planning, it's a council decision. When it comes to the planning committee, it's a council decision. So I just wanted to see if there's any openness to support that and formalise that. But otherwise, I'm happy to keep moving through.
I don't think that that by putting it as a council workshop excludes them from participating. We could invite them to the workshop. I don't think we need formal direction to do that. We've invited third parties, I guess, many times to participate in workshops where we've wanted their input prior to getting into the council chamber. So I don't see that recommendation excludes them.
Yeah, equally, I've seen a number of nods in the screen, so I would say that I'm comfortable that we can include them informally, but I just wanted to raise that as an important part. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move an amendment to delete via council workshops from that recommendation. My reason being, my reason being is that if we look at the wording of this recommendation, it says that direction be provided. And direction being provided is actually decision making, and that is what should sit in meetings in a transparent way in the chamber or via Teams. I'm really uncomfortable with the growing acceptance of the amount of direction that seems to be encouraged and given via workshops. I think our decision making needs to happen in a transparent way. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't have workshops, but we need to be really clear that workshops are for information gathering and discussion, but should not be for providing direction or decision making. So that's my reason for moving that. I understood that Councillor Barrett might be happy to second that, but he can confirm whether that's the case.
Thank you. We've had a nod from Councillor Barrett, so I'm going to take the nod as a yes. All right, councillors, we are now on the amendment, not the original recommendation. So can you just please review your status in the queue? And if you're not wanting to speak to the amendment, then I'll ask that you lower your hand for now, and you can jump back in once we've moved past the amendment. Just a brief comment from me is I'm going to vote against the amendment. As stated when I moved the substantive motion, was that I think that actually that provides an opportunity for us to have a proper discussion around this, and as alluded to through comments from Councillor Dennison as well, an opportunity to actually bring some of our key partners into that conversation early before we get into the council chamber. The council chamber, appreciate the transparency that comes with that, but it isn't an environment where we can have a good, robust back and forth conversation. It is where we are asking questions and then debating items. It's not where we can be tweaking things or setting direction or making changes at a more minor level. That's I think a much more tedious process that should be done in a workshop, where there's a bit more free and frank discussion. And so that's the reason that I'm sticking to the opportunity, if possible, to have a workshop first, and I'll vote against the amendment. And I'm now assuming councillors in the queue are for the amendment. So Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly to clarify for elected members, the recommendation now under consideration does not preclude a workshop. What it does do is make it crystal clear the direction is set through the committee. The workshop can inform, etc., but I'm very uncomfortable with any sort of language that links direction setting with workshops. That's why I'd ask you to support the recommendation that's now under consideration. It ensures that the committee sets the direction, and it by no means precludes a workshop. And I, as the chair, quite agree that a workshop would be helpful just in terms of doing some of that initial input into the process. I would very much look forward to the master plan steering group having input at that stage as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Dennison. Councillor Dennison, I'm sure your comment is really, really good, but we can't hear you.
It's outstanding. You can even hear it now, especially when I concur with you as chair, your view of voting against this. But for others, I just wanted to say that workshops are not a new part of a healthy decision making, and to give a steer to officers where they can direct their report. It saves time, it's efficient, it's effective. And to get those other wider group stakeholders in early, I think that's a helpful way to have the conversation. So just to be silent on not expressing workshops in this recommendation, I think it's just a play on a political play, because I think it's a vital part. Even being referenced saying that just because we don't say it here in this recommendation, that doesn't mean we don't have to have them. I think let's be explicit, let's have them. I think it's going to be worthwhile. And in the past, council have even redirected stuff back into workshops to help with setting a clearer way of setting direction in the past. And it's been nothing new. And I'm not going to hide behind the fact that I think that they're a key part of our healthy decision making. So I'm going to vote against it. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I jumped back in again because I think we're talking at cross purposes here. It's really the word direction. That's the thing we should be debating. So look, I'm not going to support the amendment, although I do have some sympathy with the mover and seconder. I mean, to be really honest, councillors, this is the process that we operate in. And we know that decision making isn't made in workshops. But it's the only way we can get some outside input to this, and especially the steering group members, which are mainly external parties and partners, including Rangatane. So the only other way we can do that is have a big debate in the chamber, and it becomes quite gladiatorial. So, or it could become quite gladiatorial. So I think some sort of information sharing, some sort of I suppose briefing in a sense is a better way to go. So I do think we're just playing with the language and the words. So yeah, thank you. I won't be supporting it.
Councillor Dingwall, are you wanting to comment on the amendment?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with the Mayor. I think the word direction is the real issue here. But I think I will not be supporting the amendment, mainly because I do think it's important that we do clarify that we have the workshop, because as we all know, I'm not very good at having concise questions in the chamber. So it'd be great to be able to flesh those questions out in a proper workshop setting. So I'm all for the workshop, but not the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. We will go back to right of reply from Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I think what some elected members have missed here is that neither myself or Councillor Barrett are suggesting that workshops shouldn't occur. I think what this amendment specifically clarifies is that the workshop is not the place where we give direction. I do acknowledge there is some value in us having that engagement with other stakeholder groups, and in this particular regard, I think there can be some some value in us engaging with the Arena Mass Steering Group. But it's really important for us to realise that a workshop does not give us a framework for proper decision making. So if someone makes a suggestion in a workshop, and if a few people nod their heads, an officer may take that as, oh, that's a direction from council, and I don't think that's a good way to give direction. Already I've made a comment in a previous item today where we were given a scope, provided a scope of something in a workshop. Some of us were not comfortable with that scope. I recall expressing that. I did not have a framework to test whether I was on my own with that or whether there were other councillors who were also uncomfortable with that scope. If we had been able to have that scope presented to a meeting, we could have tested that, and that would have given officers much clearer direction about whether they were on the right track. I still to this day do not know whether the majority of councillors were uncomfortable with that scope or whether it was just a few of us. So I think it's really important. It might seem pedantic to some of you. I think this is an extremely important point, that we need to be clear that our decision making happens in the context of a meeting, and that provides the appropriate framework for good decision making. And I also would go as far as to say that I think that would be us complying with the Local Government Act and its intentions. I'm really concerned about the amount of direction that's being sought through workshops. I think it's valuable for discussion. I think it's valuable for information giving or gathering, but certainly not for decision making. So if I would encourage you to support this. I'm really nervous about what this would communicate if us as elected members, if this is not supported, then we're basically saying, yes, it's okay to make decisions in workshops, and that's just not okay.
Thank you. Can we have the amendment back up on the screen, please? Great, so the amendment is to delete via council workshops, and so it would then read that direction on the arena master plan review be provided by council and reporting through the planning and strategy committee. Right, could I have elected members back on the screen now, please?
Could I ask for a division for this, please, Madam Chair?
Absolutely. Thank you, Carly. Sarah, can I ask you to take us through a division?
Sure. Okay, division. Councillor Bowen is away. Councillor Butt.
Against.
Councillor Dennison.
Against.
Councillor Meehan.
Against.
Councillor Hancock.
Against.
Councillor Barrett.
For.
Mayor Smith.
Against.
Councillor Finlay.
Against.
Councillor McCallard.
Against.
Deputy Mayor Rutherford. Sorry, Councillor Rutherford.
Against.
Councillor Dingwall.
Against.
Councillor Harpeter.
Against.
Councillor Petrinas.
Against.
Councillor Johnson.
Against.
Councillor Naylor.
For.
Okay. It's 2 for, 12 against.
Thank you, Sarah. So the amendment has lost. We are going back to the original recommendation 1 and 2. I'll open comments back up. We are going to get through this item before we break for lunch, so keep that in mind with how you frame up your comments. All right, that will depend on how long you get to eat. Mr. Mayor, set the example. Let's go.
Yeah, noted, Madam Chair, so I'll be very brief. Look, I'm supportive of the recommendations. I do think an update is smart. Things change, opportunities arise, some opportunities may have passed. So I think it's wise and smart to have the full council informed, but let's not use the IP and the historical and knowledge and learnings gained by the project steering group. Many of them are external partners to council, and of course they're wide ranging. So they're cultural, they're sporting, they're promoter, and community driven. So I think it's smart to just have a light touch on this. And of course, we've got quite a lot of new officers too in this space, and even the officer leading this work wasn't 100% familiar with the background. So I think it's smart to use the IP of the team that did I have to say, an excellent job. And it was more than just implementation. I think that's rather underdoing it. But Councillor Dennison, Beatty, Harpeta and Meehan will know what I'm talking about there. So I support the recommendation. Thank you.
Are there no other councillors wishing to comment? Great. We will go back to the recommendation then, our two recommendations. Thank you, Carly. So we are going to vote on recommendation 1, that direction on the Arena Master Plan review be provided by council via council workshops and reporting through the Planning and Strategy Committee. And recommendation 2, to note that regardless of whether direction on the Arena Master Plan review is provided by the Arena Master Plan Steering Group or council, final approval of the Arena Master Plan review will be a council decision. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Harpeta, and we will vote by a show of hands. All those in favour?
Madam Chair,
any opposed?
I'm opposing recommendation 1, but not 2. So I put a message in chat to say, could we have these taken separately?
Oh, my apologies, I missed that. Can I just clarify, is Councillor Naylor the only one who wants to oppose recommendation 1? Councillor Naylor and Councillor Barrett will note you voting against recommendation 1 but in support of recommendation 2.
Thank you.
And thank you. So recommendation 2 is carried unanimously. Recommendation 1 with those 2 opposing votes noted. Right, we are going to adjourn planning and strategy until the conclusion of the Arts, Culture and Heritage meeting. And I will just note now, item 11, which is the draft Palmerston North Stormwater Bylaw, deliberations and adoption, will be deferred to full council because our legal advisor has noted a couple of tidy ups that need to happen around some definitions in response to submissions. So rather than going through all of that today, we're just going to pop that through to full council, and we will finish the last 2 items after Arts, Culture and Heritage.
Madam Chair, I might not be back. I might be back, but I might not be.
Well, it'll be a real treat to see what happens when we resume the meeting.
I know.
Thank you, Councillor.
I know.
All right, enjoy your lunch. We'll see you at the next meeting.